Welcome, everybody. My name is John Archidiacono. I'm the president and CEO here of the Health Museum. We are excited you're here today. I understand it's a little bit warm in here, so we're working on trying to cool it off with the typical Houston weather, the ups and downs. We've had a lot of challenges maintaining the temperature here in the museum, but I'm excited to be here today to work with the Women's Fund and Alzheimer's Association to host this important topic. We're all interested in this. It's really relevant, and we're excited that you all are here today. If you get a chance, please feel free to walk around the Health Museum and kind of see what we have out there. We are actually having an exhibit that's opening up. It's actually, the opening is Friday, and it opens to the public on Saturday, and it's called The Secret World Inside You. And I know you're all wondering, what does that mean? It's all about microbiomes and gut health. And I don't know if any of you were here about, in August of last year, the Women's Fund also did a lecture on microbiome and gut health. And so it's a relatively timely topic here at the Health Museum. So please stop by and check that out. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Linda Rhodes, who's the Executive Director of the Women's Fund, and she'll get this party started. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking time to be here with us today. 2019 marks a major milestone for the Women's Fund, and I am really excited to be the Executive Director at this time. We are celebrating fabulous 40 years. So 40 years of providing women and girls with the tools they need to be advocates for their health. We're pleased to be collaborating today with the Health Museum on Doc Talk, and they have me doing two things at one time, so this may be difficult. And what an honor it is to be working with the museum district's only Smithsonian affiliate. What an accomplishment. We would also like to recognize the John P. McGovern Foundation for providing funding for today's program, as well as the Alzheimer's Association for providing the expertise. Let's see where we are. Since 1979, the Women's Fund has been focusing our efforts to empower women and Houston area women and girls to be advocates for their health and wellness by providing free publications and curriculum-based classes, workshops, and lectures like today's Doc Talk. In 2018, we experienced a record year, reaching more than 11,900 women and girls through our programming and distributing close to 8,300 of our publications, primarily in underserved and at-risk neighborhoods in the greater Houston area. And we have some of our publications out front if you would like to take them, and we know our work is vital to the community and are planning another record year for 2019. At this time, I want to turn over the program to ABC Channel 13 anchor and our good friend and advisory board member, Gina Gaston.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you. Do I need to turn this off? Turn it off for now.
Hey. How's everyone? It's my pleasure to be back here with you guys for Doc Talk. It's a real treat to get a chance to listen to some authorities on some topics that interest all of us and our well-being, and also get a chance to participate in a discussion. Oftentimes, many of you are nearly as expert as our panelists, have a lot of really intelligent questions. I want everyone to know that we are going to have 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the program to give you a chance for Q&A. I'll rely on someone from the audience to give me a cue when we reach that point. Also, we want to let you know that we are currently live. So don't pick your nose or scratch any inappropriate parts of your body. We're live both on the museum and the Women's Fund Facebook pages. So hello to all of our at-home audiences. We're also taping this session so that people can pull it up, access the information at their leisure. It will be posted on the Women's Fund's website. So if you have some friends that you're thinking, dang it, they really missed out, they would have loved this information, they still have a chance to go back and listen to it, which is wonderful. So as many of you know, Alzheimer's disease is an irreversible progressive brain disorder, and it slowly destroys memory and thinking skills, and eventually the ability to carry out the simplest tasks. In most people with Alzheimer's, symptoms first appear in their mid-60s. Estimates vary, but experts suggest that more than 5.5 million Americans may have Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's disease is currently ranked as the 6th leading cause of death in the United States, but recent estimates indicate that the disorder may in fact rank 3rd, just behind heart disease and cancer, as a cause of death for older people. Just by point of reference, how many of you in this room have been affected by Alzheimer's? So a majority of us for certain. So as I said at the beginning, we intimately have an interest in knowing more about this and our well-being and the well-being of our loved ones. So with us today to help give us more insight about Alzheimer's is Jim Ray, Director of the Neurodegeneration Consortium, say that 3 times fast, University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center, Dr. Ray there, and Richard Elbein, CEO of Alzheimer's Association Houston and Southeast Chapter. So welcome to both of you. We appreciate you being here today. I'm going to let each of you tell us a little bit about yourself with a self-introduction. Dr. Ray, if we could begin with you.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. My name is Jim Ray, and I'm the director of the NDC. That's what we call it because it's too hard to say, which is a collaboration between MD Anderson, Baylor, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and Mount Sinai School of Medicine. We're all decided to work together to try to find cures for Alzheimer's disease. So I've been working on Alzheimer's disease my entire career, mostly in the pharmaceutical industry where we've tried to develop drugs. If you've seen the news, you know we haven't succeeded yet. So we decided to try it a new way and working together across institutions, collaborating together. And I'm originally from Alabama, but now I finally got to Texas, and I'm really glad to be here with you all today.
Got here fast as you could.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great, and I'm Richard Elbein. I'm the CEO of the Alzheimer's Association Houston and Southeast Texas chapter. I've been at the Alzheimer's Association as the executive for 17 years. Before that, I was in healthcare. I was in administration in for-profit healthcare, so it was a little bit of a change. But kind of like getting to Texas, I got to the nonprofit as fast as I could. I have a very strong personal connection with Alzheimer's disease. My paternal grandmother and my maternal grandfather both had Alzheimer's disease. And my mother and my aunt, who I have been the caregiver for both, have mixed dementias. So it's pretty prevalent throughout the family and a compelling reason to stay very actively involved.
Richard, I want to get started with something you alluded to. You said mixed dementia. I think one of the biggest things that everyone wonders about when it comes to Alzheimer's is the difference in Alzheimer's and dementia and how you know which one is at play.
Yeah. So there's a slide behind me, I hope? Yeah. Okay, great. So I have colleagues here that are either helping with the slides or monitoring whether I say something really stupid. And she's promised she's going to jump up and wave her hands. So if you notice somebody in the back waving, you'll know something's really wrong. So the slide that you see is kind of a visual explanation of Alzheimer's and dementia. So the Alzheimer's Association runs a helpline that is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we get all kinds of questions and calls from families who are worrying about Alzheimer's or individuals. And one very common comment that we hear is, well, my mother doesn't actually have Alzheimer's. Thankfully, all she has is a little bit of dementia. And we are a little alarmed by that. And we get calls from people who say, well, my doctor said it's not Alzheimer's, it's just dementia. So these are concerning comments, and they, of course, are driven both by a little bit of a confusion about the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia in the public, but also among healthcare professionals who sometimes, because they're not wanting to use the word Alzheimer's, will use the word dementia thinking it's somehow a softer term. So the difference is that when you hear the term dementia, what's being referred to is a syndrome or a set of symptoms that are observable. So those symptoms are things like changes in memory, language, reasoning, and then a whole set of cognitive abilities that can affect everyday life. So the thing about those changes is that early in the development of dementia, the individual themselves knows something is wrong, and they're recognizing changes in those particular symptoms. As the disease progresses, other people start to notice the difference. So by the time you as a family member say to your siblings, gosh, have you noticed that Dad has something going on? He doesn't seem to be, he used to be really great at language, but his language skills are kind of slipping. By the time we recognize that as a family member, the disease has progressed some, or the syndrome has progressed some. And so then we go to a physician to ask them to evaluate what's going on. If the physician comes back and says to us, well, your loved one has dementia, that's a little bit like taking your child to the doctor because you notice that they have a fever, and at the end, all the doctor says is, your child has fever. We knew this. This is why we're there. So dementia is describing the set of symptoms, the syndrome, that is observable. So then the question is, what's causing this particular set of symptoms? And the most common cause is a neurodegenerative disease called Alzheimer's disease. So it's the most common cause of dementia, but certainly not the only cause. And I have to also say that there are causes of dementia that are treatable and even reversible, such as thyroid changes. So that may cause it. Depression could be a reason that someone's experiencing or dementia-like symptoms. Alcohol abuse could also do that, and certain vitamin deficiencies. So if it's a neurodegenerative disease, the most common cause is Alzheimer's disease. And often in about half the people who have Alzheimer's disease, on autopsy, it turns out they also have perhaps a secondary cause of dementia. And the most common secondary cause of dementia is vascular dementia. So you see both of those up on the screen. That combination of two causes of dementia is referred to as mixed dementia. So it's not the same as just saying someone has dementia. Mixed dementia is a particular description of having two different causes of dementia. As you mentioned, it's a fatal disease. It's the 6th leading cause of death. Alzheimer's was first described in 1906 by Dr. Alzheimer in Germany, so he got his naming rights on the disease. But really, the active research in Alzheimer's disease has only been going on for about 35 years. And so one of the things we've learned in the last 35 years is that Alzheimer's disease is a progressive disease that starts 20 or more years before any symptoms ever manifest. So 20 plus years before anybody's demonstrating symptoms, they've started developing Alzheimer's disease. And I consider that a very hopeful opportunity, because if it's a disease that starts 20 plus years ago, and there's a huge window of time which someone like Dr. Ray can develop a drug that could intervene and either stop the progression of the disease, slow the progression of the disease. There could be some intervention that could prevent Alzheimer's disease from progressing to Alzheimer's dementia. So that, I think, is very hopeful.
So when you talk about the idea of early detection, let's talk about how you would diagnose and how it is you might be able to find out if someone has dementia, perhaps even before, Alzheimer's rather, even before there are acute symptoms.
Sure. So traditionally, you get diagnosed with dementia with a test that your neurologist may administer. And there's on the slide here behind you can see someone drawing a clock. I don't know if you've ever had a family member have to do this test. You go into the doctor's office, they suspect you have dementia, they give you some simple tasks to do that almost anyone should be able to do. One of them is commonly spell the word world backwards. So they're not all that easy, but they're pretty easy. You should be able to do them. And someone with dementia will fail at a number of these tasks. That's when your doctor will first start taking or recommending a course of action. Not that long ago, there was nothing you could do further to diagnose what the condition was. It was just the doctor's intuition and experience. But now the tests are more sophisticated, And we can do things that can eliminate other causes, like if you've had strokes, sometimes that can cause confusion and dementia. Well, you can get an MRI and eliminate that possibility. Blood work will tell you if you have a vitamin deficiency or a thyroid problem. But there's also now some very sophisticated methods where people can diagnose Alzheimer's patients to the exclusion of all other diseases with imaging techniques and also with spinal fluid tabs. So you can see on the left a drawing of a patient getting a spinal tap. It's a needle gets put in between your cervix right there, and you draw out some spinal fluid. That can be measured biochemically to see if there are changes in there that are indicative of Alzheimer's disease. That's not used as commonly, though, as the imaging. So here you go to an imaging center, a specialty center. This isn't commonly used. It's not widely used because it's a special kind of radioactive chemical that needs to be made locally. So at places like Baylor and Methodist, this can be done, but not at your typical doctor's office. And you get a brain scan, and if you have these plaques and tangles in your brain that are characteristic of Alzheimer's, those can be detected by imaging. So many people don't go to that level to be diagnosed, but those technologies are now becoming available. In the future, hopefully everyone will be definitively diagnosed during their life instead of how it used to be, where it was a guessing game and you could only be diagnosed after your death.
So with the imaging and with the spinal fluid check, how far along would you how bad would the symptoms have to be for those to show Alzheimer's?
So interestingly, these tests, when they're applied, will show you the start of the disease years before your symptoms. In many cases, people can be caught early enough where they haven't developed any symptoms at all. However, they may never develop the symptoms, so it's not a definitive test. If you show positive and you don't have memory problems yet, you may never develop the memory problems, but you're at risk. So, but the disease is so slow, as Richard mentioned, that it is possible, theoretically, to catch it before the symptoms appear.
As the ability to test and to make diagnoses or preliminary possible diagnoses improve, what are your guys' thoughts on whether or not people should be tested? Because I know sometimes people say, you know what, I don't want to know. If something's coming bad, I don't want to know. I'd like to hear both of your thoughts on that.
Well,
I'm pitching it to you first.
Dr. Ray, you're in the hot seat.
I think you should, if you have a medical condition, you should always try to understand what it is. And maybe there's nothing that can be done, but at least you need to eliminate the possibility that there's something that could be done. So if you're exhibiting, in our case, we're talking about dementia, if you're exhibiting symptoms of dementia, maybe it's correctable, or maybe you've had strokes and you need to go on some sort of medication for atrial fibrillation or something like that. You want to know that it's Alzheimer's. There may not be a lot we can do today, but there's also clinical trials you can sign up for, and there's education that may benefit you. So I would definitely go through the process of finding out definitively what you have.
Yeah, so I actually want to ask the audience a question. How many of you would want to know if you were developing Alzheimer's disease? Really? Wow, that's amazing. I can tell you
I think
years
we have
ago,
a select group.
maybe, because years ago that would not have been the answer. Everyone would have actually moved their hands and sat on them so that they didn't accidentally get misunderstood. I think there's a difference between screening and diagnosis, and I think it's important to understand that those are different activities. So there are some organizations that offer screening, and they do them in places like shopping malls. So I would discourage doing a shopping mall screening for Alzheimer's disease for a lot of reasons. It's probably the same reason that it's not a great idea to do a shopping mall HIV test. This is a complex disease that has life implications for the individual being tested as well as the entire family. And I think that there's a need for support around the conversation, regardless of whether the answer is yes or no. So typically, someone would look to get diagnosed because they are experiencing some problem or challenge. And as Dr. Ray says, if you know that there's something going on or you think there's a problem, that's a good reason to go in and have a true diagnostic evaluation to see what the problem is. And that's very different than, hey, I have 15 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and do this screening in the Galleria while I have nothing else to do.
And there's a graphic behind you, too, that talks about some of what an early diagnosis might allow you to access. And you mentioned as well opportunity to be a part of clinical trials. And so there are some tangible benefits, I guess, too.
Right. So what's interesting is that what we see out in the rest of the world, apparently there are a lot of people in the rest of the world not like you all, because, for example, we have a cousin organization in the UK called Alzheimer's Society, and they've done a study looking at people who are concerned about some cognitive changes, and typically they postpone any kind of diagnosis or evaluation for more than a year because of their fear of Alzheimer's disease. So the typical individual and family is very afraid of the diagnosis and avoids, often they avoid having the conversation even to identify that there's a challenge, and then going to a professional to actually go through the process. And I will say that, so within my own family, I have a family member who all of the children said, gosh, there's something going on with Dad. And so everyone kind of agreed there was a problem, but no one wanted to say it out loud or talk about it. And when, you can imagine, I was like the canary in the coal mine and saying, I think we really need to do something. We should make an appointment and go in for an evaluation. And everyone wanted to avoid the conversation. So in fact, more than a year, the family avoided the conversation. And eventually, I kind of became a louder canary. And so I made the appointment and then told them when it was. And so they took this particular family member in. And one of the surprising experiences is that no one had talked with him about the fact that they were observing these changes. And of course, you can imagine he never said anything to anyone. So they go through the entire diagnosis process. He's diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and his first comment is, I'm so relieved because finally I understand what has been going on with me. So obviously this was not a mystery. He knew something was wrong, but he didn't know what it was, and he didn't have a way to talk about it. He didn't feel safe to talk about it, and since nobody else was mentioning it, he wasn't either. So one of the benefits of that early diagnosis is that he was then able to finally understand what was happening. And it took the lid off. Everybody then was able to talk about it and say, yes, so now we know what it is. Let's talk about what we're going to do with it. And so that was a big relief. And I think we see this in a lot of families, that it provides a lot of relief. And of course, if you can imagine, since almost everyone is uses Google for every kind of information we need, if you say something's wrong with my brain, if you put that in Google, you don't really get anywhere. But if you have a name, whether it's mixed dementia or Alzheimer's or Lewy body, you can put it in a Google search and you can find support. And so as soon as you know it's Alzheimer's, you put in Alzheimer's in a Google search and you find the Alzheimer's Association and all the support that comes with it. If you don't have a name for what's going on, you don't find any support.
And why, Dr. Ray, is it that we don't have an effective treatment for Alzheimer's? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think one of the main reasons Richard alluded to a minute ago, which is Alzheimer's was not considered to be a serious disease. It was just something that happened when you got older. And so it wasn't until maybe the mid-'80s where research really started to pick up. But I will show you this as an illustration of how hard it is to cure Alzheimer's. So this is a colorful diagram of a protein, and your body has thousands and thousands of different proteins. And each one of your cells, which is of course microscopic in size, has billions of proteins inside of them. So this is how tiny they are. And they have this intricate structure you can only see with an X-ray. You can only solve the structure of a protein with an X-ray. And that little purple set of balls right there in the middle is a drug. So you need to find a chemical that's that small that can bind to a protein, and only one, and it has to be the protein that's causing the disease, and you need to restore its normal function so the disease never happens. So it's hard to cure anything, much less a disease that has the properties of Alzheimer's disease. It takes so long, it happens at an advanced stage. So maybe the next slide. One big problem we have that's specific to our field is that animals don't get Alzheimer's disease. So you can feed a mouse cheeseburgers and it'll get clogged arteries. You can get a mouse to get high blood pressure. You can't get a mouse to get Alzheimer's disease. And this is just illustrated here. A human can be born, in some rare cases, you can be born with a mistake in your DNA that causes your Alzheimer's. And 100% of the time, by the time you're 45 or 50, you have early onset Alzheimer's because of this gene. We can stuff a mouse full of that human gene, and it'll never get Alzheimer's. It'll get plaques and, in some cases, tangles, but never will it show the same problems a human can. So we don't have any way of testing our ideas without doing a clinical trial in the patients. I think I have one more on this. Yeah, and this is just a graph to show the problem that Richard mentioned a moment ago is if you look at the green line there, that's the loss of brain mass. That's what's causing your memory problems, is you're losing brain mass. And this happens over the course of decades. Then it'll accelerate, and that's when the symptoms appear. But it's been going on for a long time. So people in their 50s and 60s may be already developing Alzheimer's in some cases, but they don't show up at the doctor's office until their 70s or 80s. So trying to stop a disease that's been going for 30 years, undetected, presents a huge challenge. And then finally, we've had a real hard time doing clinical trials in people with Alzheimer's disease. In the past, it was, like I said a minute ago, it was the doctor's best guess whether or not you had Alzheimer's. And so we'd run a clinical trial with a new drug, and 30% of the people in the clinical trial had some other problem other than Alzheimer's disease. And we didn't know that, so we didn't, someone would be in the placebo group, someone would be in the drug group, and it would mess up all the statistics and nothing worked. So that's the historical challenges that have been in front of us. It's a difficult disease with a long, slow course, and making drugs is very difficult to begin with. I think, however, we'll talk about in a minute how I think we're turning the corner.
I don't think the word has gotten out that if you are diagnosed early that there's anything that can be done. And I think that's why people are reticent to get a test early, because they feel like, oh, well, all I know is bad news is coming, and I get enough bad news on Channel 13. I had to do my little plug. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the support Alzheimer's research is getting. Is there a lot of philanthropic, a lot of government support?
Yeah,
to find a
great.
cure?
So when I started with the Alzheimer's Association 17 years ago, the NIH funding for Alzheimer's disease research was actually under $400 million. So just to give you a sense of what, it sounds like a lot of money to me. If it was in my bank account, I'd be very happy. But Alzheimer's was getting $400 million, and by comparison, cancer was getting $4.6 billion. So you succeed in things you invest in, and there wasn't that much investment in Alzheimer's disease research. And it kind of plodded along at that level, $400 million for years. And I think this graph starts in 2011, is that right? So you might wonder, why is there nothing before 2011? And frankly, part of it is there's nothing before 2011. But one of the game changers in 2011 is that the Alzheimer's Association worked with a large coalition of organizations and groups and passed the National Alzheimer's Project Act. And that, NAPA is what we call it, because everything has an acronym, which you'll hear as we go on. So NAPA was passed, and what that did is created a national plan to combat Alzheimer's disease. And that's a pretty important thing, to have a strategic plan of what are we going to do. We've been kind of plodding along and not very successfully trying to develop strategies against this disease, so let's have a concerted effort. And part of what NAPA required is that the NIH answer the question, how much money do you need to really combat this disease? So NIH started having to come up with an answer, and at the same time, the Alzheimer's Association really felt empowered to mobilize advocates across the country. And so across the country, we organized people in every congressional district in the United States to start to speak to their elected officials and say, we care about the success of research in Alzheimer's disease. So that started to increase the dollars. So NIH started saying, oh, we need some more money, and the Congress people were hearing from their local district that people actually cared and might vote about this issue. And so you see that the dollars started to ramp up. The number that has been identified as what is the minimum needed to truly solve the complex question of Alzheimer's disease is $2 billion a year. $2 billion. Remember, we started at 400 million and we're there for a long time. So just to show you what the pace of change has been as Congress has taken seriously the need to invest in Alzheimer's research is that in 2019, for the first time, we crossed the 2 billion mark. We're at 2.3 billion. And the most amazing thing, if you really think about the perspective, is the increase from 2018 to 2019 was $400 million. That number should sound familiar because it's where we sat for probably a decade in Alzheimer's investment. So what's also interesting about that is that that was one of the few bipartisan bills that was passed in Congress in that year. So there's I would say, significant support from the federal government. Interestingly, Texas is one of the few states in the country that has state support for Alzheimer's research. So the state of Texas has invested about $6.4 million in Alzheimer's research in the last 10 years. And that $6.4 million primarily goes to 9 institutions in the state of Texas. And I'll just tell you that some of them are in our area: Baylor College of Medicine, UT Houston, UTMB in Galveston, and Texas A&M are 4 among the 9 that receive funding. The Alzheimer's Association is a funder of Alzheimer's research. We're actually, according to Thomas Reuters, we're the 3rd most impactful funder of Alzheimer's research after NIH and the Chinese government. And our investment in research to date is about $435 million. And that's funded about 2,900 research projects worldwide. And in Texas, just to bring it home, that's been about $13 million in the state of Texas. And currently in the Houston area, the Alzheimer's Association is funding about $1.5 million worth of research studies. We're not the only player in the market, thankfully. There are other nonprofit organizations that also fund Alzheimer's research, and the largest are the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation, which is based in New York City. They've invested about $100 million in research. Bright Focus Foundation, which is in Maryland, and they've also invested about $100 million. Cure Alzheimer's Fund, based in Boston, is about $87 million. And there's actually a group of Rotarians in the Carolinas that have come together to fund Alzheimer's research, and that group just in North and South Carolina, and I think Georgia, have funded about $7.5 million in Alzheimer's research. All of those research dollars really look at 4 areas of research. So one is the basic science, cellular and molecular processes to just understand the disease. And another area is disease detection, trying to come up with biomarkers and imaging so that we could detect this disease earlier. A third is drug development, which, of course, Dr. Ray's talking a lot about, which those drugs hopefully will help manage the symptoms of the disease and hopefully also the progress and maybe cure the disease. And then finally, there's research in risk reduction and prevention areas. So those are the 4 areas that are studied with those dollars.
Well, let's talk about drugs and what's in the pipeline in terms of treatment, cure, alleviating symptoms.
Right, so there's been a lot of investment in Alzheimer's disease drug development by the pharmaceutical industry and by the U.S. government over the last several years. Before I tell you what's being done, let me just introduce you a little bit to the disease itself. These are microscopic images of the human brain of someone who died of Alzheimer's disease. And if you look to the left, this is what's called an amyloid plaque. and you get thousands or millions of these plaques depositing in your brain. They're not soluble, they're gooey clusters of protein, something similar to a plaque you get in your artery for atherosclerosis. And these fill your brain. And on the right is called tau, and that makes up the tangle. Tau is the protein that makes the tangle. Amyloid is the protein that makes the plaque. And there's also inflammation. It's supposed to be illustrated in that bottom square. I'm not sure why I picked that particular photo, but there's also inflammation in the brain, which is characteristic of the disease. So what's been going on for the last 5 to 10 years, people used antibodies, which are large molecules that your body produces to fight off infection, engineered them to attack the plaques, injected them to patients, and cleared the plaques. But the patients didn't get any better. Now, this was surprising because the plaques are the first symptom, the first thing that appears in the brain that we think is related to Alzheimer's disease. So almost everyone believed that clearing the plaques would slow the disease. The next, people are now trying the same approach to try to clear the tangles from the brain. Now, if you're a mouse and you have tangles in your brain, you're cured. We've got that. That's all been looking really good. Now the tests are happening in people. It's not an approved drug, but there are clinical trials in phase 2. So it's not quite ready yet for phase 3. But if those look promising, maybe in the next 3 or 4 years, those would become something that would become an option for physicians. But we just don't know yet. We don't have any data yet whether that's going to work either or not. So those have been the 2 major approaches. The third one is inflammation, and that's more in the future. But I think there's a lot of promise that we can slow the inflammation in the brain and prevent Alzheimer's from progressing as rapidly. Is that the only slide I had? Okay, good.
So that's talking about cures.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any things you want to, any other drugs you want to talk about in terms of symptoms or anything like that you know that's in the pipeline?
Sure, there's quite a bit of effort to develop drugs that will boost memory. There are already 2 types of drugs available that have been FDA approved that you can get. One of them is like Aricept or Exelon, and the other is called Namenda. And these do provide some measurable but modest benefit to your memory for some period of time. It's been very difficult to find new drugs that do that even better. And people have tried really hard, and we haven't succeeded. So now the focus has shifted to finding drugs that treat some of the other symptoms, like sometimes Alzheimer's patients, if you've dealt with this, wander, get up in the middle of the night, they don't sleep well, and they'll take long naps in the day and then wake up at 2 in the morning and want to leave or cook. So a drug that restored normal sleeping patterns would be very helpful to families. Also, some patients have outbursts that get emotional, or in some cases even violent. In those cases, if the patient could be given a medication that helped them calm down, that would be very useful. So people are working on that now. None of these are quite ready, but in the coming 5 years, yeah, maybe some of these will work out.
And what about, are there any drugs for people who are maybe late 50s who have taken some of these tests that say, okay, you might have a propensity to getting Alzheimer's? Anything that they can take that might help them? And we'll get to some non-drug things in a moment. Are there anything?
No, there's nothing approved by the FDA or known to work, even not approved by the FDA, that will slow down Alzheimer's disease or actually any of those other dementia-causing neurodegenerative conditions. But there are some things maybe you can do that can make it progress more slowly, give you more years that are symptom-free. That's where we're really shooting right now. There's nothing a doctor can prescribe to you, though. And there's a lot of things you'll hear. If this is something that becomes a concern to you or a family member, you'll go online and you'll see ads for stuff that's been strained out of jellyfish, or if that stuff really worked, they'd get it approved by the FDA and they'd make $10 billion a year with it. So just keep that in mind.
So Richard, I was going to ask you any promising non-pharmacological answers.
Yeah. So in about 2004, the Alzheimer's Association rolled out this very aspirational program called Maintain Your Brain, which was a set of lifestyle recommendations. And it didn't claim to reduce the risk of Alzheimer's disease, but it suggested that it would improve brain health and brain function. At about the same time, our cousin organization in the UK, Alzheimer's Society, also rolled out a program very similar called Be Headstrong. And both of them were exciting, and we felt like, wow, we're finally talking about risk reduction, and we're finally talking about lifestyle issues. The science part of our organization looked at all of the data that existed and said, you know, we're not really ready for prime time to talk about lifestyle because the science is just not there. Everyone hopes that it's true, but the science, there hasn't been enough to really be confident that these lifestyle changes would make a difference. So we shelved both of those programs. We in the United States and Alzheimer's Society in the UK shelved those programs. And we, for almost a decade, stopped talking about lifestyle interventions for Alzheimer's disease. And so then some things started to change. There started to be a trickle of risk reduction, lifestyle interventions, and started to have some promising results. So I want to mention a couple of them. Okay, so the first is the MIND diet. And as I said, you know, everything has an acronym, and this one's going to make your head explode. So MIND, M-I-N-D, stands for Mediterranean Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay. So that's MIND. You just have to believe that they did find those. So the MIND diet is a combination of the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet. So here we go, another. So the DASH diet is dietary approaches to stop hypertension. So it took the Mediterranean diet, which I think everyone has some idea what that is, and this DASH diet, it combined them and said, okay, can we actually change the trajectory of cognitive decline or Alzheimer's disease? This was run out of Rush University in Chicago. It was a very big study. 1,000 people participated over a period of 5 years. The average age of the participants was 80 years old. And it was pretty exciting, the results from this study. So it was published in 2015. So imagine it was going on for 5 years before, and then they looked at the results and published it in 2015. And what was observed is that of people who closely followed this diet, there was a 53% reduction in the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. That's huge, 53% by following this diet. And even if they only moderately followed the diet, I say only moderately, if they moderately followed the diet, they still had a 35% reduction in developing Alzheimer's disease or cognitive impairment. The other kind of exciting thing is those folks who followed the diet, when they tested their cognitive function, they tested like a person 7.5 years younger. So that's pretty exciting. So I know you all want to know, so what is this diet? And so I'm going to tell you about this diet, and I will first say that this diet is, I'll say it's easier to say MIND than it is to do the MIND diet. So basically there are two buckets. There are foods that you're encouraged to include, and there are foods that you're discouraged from eating. And you can already guess. If you really like it, I promise it's on the discouraged side. So there are some things that you're supposed to do daily. So for example, we're supposed to include a dark green leafy vegetable every day. So a dark green leafy vegetable, by the way, is not iceberg lettuce. It's things like kale and spinach and all the different greens, collards and mustard greens, and so things like that every day. And then also to include another vegetable every day. So that seems pretty simple. Dark green leafy vegetable every day and a serving of another vegetable every day. So far, I think everybody's good with that. And then a 1 ounce daily serving of nuts. So again, so far we're pretty good. And then twice a week, you should include a serving of berries. So, things like blueberries and raspberries and strawberries. So again, so far pretty good. then 3 times a week a serving of beans. So this is the minimum. You can go over these servings. So on the include side, you can have 3 or more servings a week of beans. So I know there's already pushback when I say that. So 3 or more servings of beans. And then every day, 3 servings or more of whole grains of some sort. So by the way, whole wheat Wonder Bread is not a whole grain, just so that you're clear. And then at least 1 serving a week of fish, at least 2 servings a week of poultry. If you're adding fat to the diet, it should be in the form of olive oil. And then really I'm going to tell you, this is the best part of the diet, is that you are instructed to include 5 ounces of red wine every day. Now, the one caveat to that is that it's not a multiplier effect. So if you have 10 ounces, it's not better. It is the lower and upper limit at the same time, 5 ounces. If you're not an alcohol drinker, you can substitute red grape juice and get some of the same benefits, although not all. So then you want to know, well, wait, so this is sounding great. What's the bad part? So the bad part is the foods that should be avoided: red meat. So red meat, no more than 4 servings a week. And by the way, serving is very specifically defined. It's not a 12-ounce T-bone steak. It's a 4-ounce portion of red meat, only 4 or less times a week. Cheese, this is the one that kills me. Cheese only 1 time a week, 1 serving a week. So you're not even have 2 slices of pizza. Just forget it, that like pizza's out. And then no more than 1 tablespoon of butter or stick margarine a day. So because you're using olive oil instead. And then fried foods, no more than 1 a week, 1 fried food. And the other one that kills me is no more than 5 sweets a week. I was counting yesterday, and I can tell you, I think I did my week's worth of sweets yesterday. So anyway, that's the MIND diet. So it is challenging, but the results are compelling. So that's pretty exciting. That's a lifestyle intervention. And that led to the next exciting study, which is the finger study. So I always laugh and say, yeah, this was to give Alzheimer's the finger. This is the Finnish geriatric intervention study to prevent cognitive impairment and disability. That's how you get finger. And this was also published in 2015, but it was only a 2-year study. And it was, again, a very large study, 1,200 participants. And it looked at a whole range of lifestyle interventions, which included diet, exercise, social engagement, cognitive stimulation, and then management of health conditions like cardiovascular disease, particularly hypertension, and diabetes. And this study, which was published in 2015, found that the people who were the test ones, so that they were the ones that were having all of those lifestyle conditions managed, that they had reduced cognitive decline. So that's pretty exciting, reduced cognitive decline. And of course, we wouldn't be surprised because we knew something from the MIND diet, although I will tell you, Finns are probably not following a Mediterranean diet on the best day. I mean, they're burying fish in the ice. I promise it's not a Mediterranean diet. So the question is, how transferable was that study to other places on the planet, and particularly places that have a much diverse population like the United States? So the Alzheimer's Association convened a group of folks from around the world, and it's called the World Fingers. And so there are actually countries around the globe that are doing some version of this finger study. The Alzheimer's Association is fully funding the US Pointer study, which is the study that's being done in the United States. And you can guess, Pointer actually stands for something. And so that is protect through a lifestyle intervention to reduce risk. You really have to work hard to find Pointer in that, I'll just tell you. But so this study is, again, a lifestyle intervention study, and it's looking at 5 sites around the country. 3 of them have already been identified. North Carolina, Northern California, and Chicago are 3 of the 5 sites. We're still waiting to see where the other 2 will be. The study will have 2,500 participants, so more than twice the size of the finger study, a much more diverse population, 60 to 79 years old. And it's also going to be a 2-year study looking at diet, exercise, cognitive and social stimulation, and then very aggressive medical management of blood pressure and diabetes. So we wait to see what the results of that will be, but it's very exciting.
What about the learning a new language and the crossword puzzles?
Yeah, so those fall under mental stimulation, and what we believe, the directional suggestion is that mental stimulation is beneficial. It's not clear how much it works by itself versus part of a package of activities that are including diet and exercise and, of course, mental stimulation and social engagement. So I think maybe specifically what I'll respond to is there are companies online that you may have noticed that claim that you can do this mental stimulation by playing some set of games or brain challenges, and that those will help stave off cognitive impairment. And there is not really a lot of evidence to suggest that's true, although you may become very good at playing that particular set of games. The studies that have looked objectively have not supported that there's long-term benefit in doing that by itself.
I think it must be time for the questions. A few more minutes. Okay. You're at MD Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
How is it that MD Anderson is involved in AD drugs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, as you know, MD Anderson's the nation's #1 cancer center, and you've seen our billboards. We don't do anything but cancer. Every one of us focus on cancer. Well, I'm the exception to the rule. And the reason that we came to MD Anderson to do a project like Alzheimer's disease is a lot of people, once they survive their cancer, they're worried about getting Alzheimer's. That's what really bothers them more than anything else. They've battled cancer before. They can go back and fight it again. But if you get Alzheimer's, what do you do? So a lot of the people who are supporters of the institution were very interested in the institution becoming involved because it's a unique place that has been really successful fighting cancer. So when I came to MD Anderson 3 years ago to take on that idea, what became interesting to me very quickly is I learned, I didn't know this before, that people who get Alzheimer's disease are less likely to get cancer, and people who get cancer are less likely to get Alzheimer's. Now, you can get both, so you can be unlucky, but we're just talking about risk. It's if you just review the medical records of, let's say, 100,000 people and ask, statistically speaking, people who got cancer, did they get Alzheimer's? They got it less than average, and vice versa. So I have that diagrammed here, that maybe this tells us that since age causes both of these diseases usually, maybe aging is a common feature to both Alzheimer's and cancer, but then some people go down one road and some people go down the other. And this kind of makes sense from a biological point of view because cancer is a disease where your cells are growing out of control, and Alzheimer's is a disease where your cells are dying out of control. And if you're really good at protecting your cells, maybe you'll get cancer. If you're really good at killing off cells, you won't get cancer, but maybe you get Alzheimer's. So this gives us a new way to think about the disease. It also presents a problem, which is the prediction of this model is that cancer therapy might push you in the other direction. Cancer therapy might cause problems. And if any of you have had chemotherapy or have family members, you might have noticed memory problems appearing after the chemotherapy. So we actually know this is true. We know that people who get cancer treatment oftentimes get nerve damage and brain function problems as a result. So we're thinking that if we can find ways to stop that, those treatments, those therapies might work for Alzheimer's as well. Do I have another? Is that it? Okay, good.
If it ain't one thing, it's another.
I know.
Kind of feel like, okay. I have a couple more questions, but we'll go ahead and open it up. Oh, we do? Okay. So, Richard, which breakthroughs are you most excited by and hopeful by?
Yeah, so actually this is pretty exciting because this week, today's only Tuesday, so this week, think about it. There's a study that was just published in the Journal of the American Medical Association that's a risk reduction study called the Sprint Mind Study. So this is not to be confused with the Mind Diet. It's a different mind. So the Sprint Mind Study was a huge study that included 9,000 participants, 50 plus years old, and it looked at managing systolic blood pressure. And the management of that blood pressure was to 120 or below, which is a pretty aggressive management of blood pressure. And this is the first randomized placebo-controlled clinical trial that demonstrates that aggressive management of blood pressure also significantly reduces the occurrence of mild cognitive impairment. And it's a really, it's an earth-shattering study because it produced a 19% reduction in mild cognitive impairment in the study group that was having their systolic blood pressure managed below 120. It also suggested that a 17% probability of reducing dementia. So this study was stopped early, unfortunately, because it was so compelling that this management of blood pressure to 120 was really so different than the control that the study was stopped, and everyone who was in the control group was put on the blood pressure management down to 120. So it was, we didn't get to see the full length of the study, but we know that it's compelling that folks with blood pressure issues should be managed down to 120. So the other thing that happened this week, at the same time as this JAMA article, is the Alzheimer's Association yesterday committed to fund a 2-year extension of this study to be able to further explore what is the impact of this medical management of blood pressure on cognitive issues over a longer period of time. So I think what you can all leave knowing is that folks with blood pressure issues should be managed to 120 because it changes the incidence of developing mild cognitive impairment, which is one of the steps in developing dementia. So it's pretty exciting.
When I hear that, it reminds me that so often the thing that helps you with one thing helps you with the other thing. Mm-hmm. The diet, it's the same diet they would tell you, generally speaking, for heart disease, for diabetes, exercise, mental stimulation, blood pressure. I know this wasn't your study, but off the top of your head, what would be the corollary between blood pressure and Alzheimer's? Do you see, I know, again, it's not your study, but do you see
Absolutely.
why one might affect the other?
No, definitely. So your brain uses up more blood than any other organ. And it's also, there's no brain cell very far from a blood vessel. So you have to have thousands of microscopic small blood vessels going all throughout your brain. If any of those are ruptured by the chronic exposure to high pressure, then you're going to lose the brain cells nearby. And so it makes sense to me that maintaining a healthy blood pressure would preserve the vasculature in your brain that's so critical for brain function.
And I'm just extrapolating here. Not research about weight per se that we know related to Alzheimer's.
Correct.
Right?
It's not a weight, it was not a weight study at all.
So, but clearly a diet that if you were following a mind diet, you'd be more likely to be at a good BMI, which helps you with, again, heart disease, helps you with blood pressure, helps you with diabetes. I'm betting that all of that is just like be in good health, and that helps you to have a better chance of managing it and while we're waiting for a cure.
Right. Some of these blood pressure, cholesterol, inflammations, they're all age-related. And by managing them, you're really just, in effect, slowing the aging process. And Alzheimer's and other dementias are caused by aging, ultimately. So it's a way to manage this that works to some extent right now while we wait for me to cure this.
What are you most excited about in terms of looking toward a cure?
Well, there's some really exciting developments. It's been really depressing for the last 10 years. I'm sure you've seen the news. Nothing's worked. But and one of the things I mentioned before is now we can tell who has Alzheimer's and who doesn't, and we can detect people for clinical trial purposes long before they have symptoms who are at risk for getting Alzheimer's disease. The second is shown below. These right there, the blue is an amyloid plaque, and what's white cottony things around that are your brain's immune cells. And these immune cells know how to fight off plaques and fight off the tangles and prevent Alzheimer's. When that process fails, that's when you start to develop Alzheimer's. And we didn't appreciate this. Even 5 years ago, we didn't know this. But we've done these huge studies involving 75 or 100,000 people that show exactly what genes change your risk profile for Alzheimer's. And most of those genes are not in your neurons, they're in the immune cells. So we have a whole new way to approach Alzheimer's disease. It's a brand new avenue that's just opened up to us. And already there's a lot of great ideas, like you make a drug to control these cells. So I'm really excited about that. Is going to be maybe the way we actually solve the problem.
Okay, so audience, we're ready for your questions. We have a hand that went up in the sweater right there in the gray right away.
Hi, I recently read, and I didn't see it other really than the headline, about a relationship between periodontal disease and Alzheimer's. And another question, I knew I was going to forget this. David Eagleman came to this in this facility and talked about his brain check, where you can get a line of your cognitive ability and you can continue to track it yourself over time. Would that be of help for those who are trying to figure out, where I am, where I start out, without to run to doctors for expensive tests? And as you're saying, catching it early is important. So can you comment on that, please?
So I'll take the second question. Well, I'll take the first question. There has been an association between periodontal disease and heart disease and dementia that's been reported many times. To me, I don't know the specifics of this study, but those studies in general have a hard time teasing apart overall poor hygiene and health, as well as poor health care in general, poor family support, et cetera, et cetera. These are all usually going together with someone who has really advanced periodontal disease. They haven't been to the dentist, they haven't been taken care of, the same as someone who's made it to 80 and doesn't have a problem. So there probably is. It makes sense there could be a relationship because of the inflammation, but I think it's just a hard thing to prove.
Because it can be an overall lifestyle of just bad
Right.
health care,
Yeah.
bad diet.
Right. So the second part of your question, which is tracking your own cognitive function. So this is a little bit about your personality and your character also, because if you're a person that just is inquisitive, it may be helpful, and it may help you appreciate it as your brain function changes over time, which, by the way, as we age, we do have some changes in brain function. For some of us, that could create a huge amount of anxiety, and that anxiety would affect our brain function. So it could, it depends if you're a neurotic person or not. So for those of us who are not neurotic, I don't know who that is, but for those people, probably it's fine. But for anybody who it would create anxiety, it would not be helpful. But, it's like noticing anything else. Your pulse, your heart rate, there are all kinds of things we can do, and certainly it's a way of self-monitoring.
People like the control. They feel like they have some control of the
Yeah.
information. We had
Thank you.
We had some other questions that went up over here.
Yes.
Way back in the back. You have a microphone, I think, right?
Yes, thank you. It's regarding diet. You mentioned cheese, like a bad thing, but there is a million kinds of cheese. Now, is there a difference between an aged cheese like Parmesan and Manchego versus mozzarella and...
Yeah, so I love that question. So if you come to dinner with me, there's a heck of a difference between Manchego and cream cheese. But in this diet, there is no nuance of a difference. So in general, a lot of these diets that are looking at whether it's managing hypertension, cardiovascular disease in general, or the Mediterranean diet, generally dairy products are actually significantly limited. So no, ultimately it doesn't make a difference. But I would say that if you're trying to get the most bang from your cheese one time a week serving, don't use cream cheese. You know, I mean, what are you thinking?
Okay.
So hopefully you're using Parmigiano Reggiano, and it's like, yes, something with a lot of flavor.
Okay, so by extension, milk?
There's not actually a recommendation about milk. So it's, I would say that the MIND diet is somewhat quiet about milk. So it's not on the avoid list and it's not on the include list. So, you know, you notice there are a lot of foods I didn't mention on the MIND diet. They're not on the 10 most desired to be part of your diet, and they're not on the 5 really you shouldn't include them if you can possibly avoid them. So there are things like, you know, where do you think yogurt falls? There are a lot of reasons to include yogurt in the diet, but it's not a recommended or excluded part of the diet. Cheese is very much in the list, and it's on the wrong side of the ledger.
There is another food, or let's not call it food, a drink that is common and everybody here takes it, and it's coffee, caffeine.
Yeah.
Does it make any difference whether you drink coffee, decaf, or regular coffee?
This diet does not weigh in on it, and there's, to my knowledge, not been a study related to Alzheimer's or dementia that's made any statement about caffeinated beverages or coffee specifically.
Yeah, right in the middle of the auditorium.
Most of the genes that apply to Alzheimer's are found in the immune system. So does that mean that someone with a compromised immune system, such as Crohn's disease, is more risk to develop Alzheimer's?
Well, that's a great question. So the question was, if many of the genes that change your risk for Alzheimer's are found in the immune system, does that mean if you have an immune problem like Crohn's disease or lupus or arthritis, does that change your risk profile for Alzheimer's? And the answer is apparently not. And the reason is the brain has its own private army. So the rest of your body is patrolled by white blood cells that go around killing bacteria and viruses. They don't go into the brain normally unless you have an injury. They stay out of the brain because you don't want your brain cells exposed to these cell-killing machines that are swimming around your bloodstream. Instead, you have these special cells within your brain that aren't circulating the blood. They live within your brain. They're born there. They live there your entire lifetime in your brain. And they function very differently than the white blood cells that are circulating through your blood. Those are the cells that are protecting your brain from aging and Alzheimer's, but somehow fail to do that later in life. So that they seem to be an unrelated biological process.
This question is for Ray. I wanted to know if there is any that has been made about the incidence of the disease attacking women to men, and some of the latest literature.
But definitely women are more susceptible to Alzheimer's than men. Even if you adjust for the fact that women live longer, and that doesn't account for the difference. It says has something to do with the biology of being female. Or I guess you could look at the other way and say something about being a male. If you deprive a rodent of estrogen and try to give it Alzheimer's disease, they're a little more resistant. So it may be something just in the hormonal nature of being female that makes you more susceptible. One thing to remember, though, too, is education is a protective factor for being diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. People with a very high educational status manage to not get diagnosed for longer than people who have less education. And historically, women didn't get educated to the same extent as men. So I think there may be some societal issues in healthcare access and so forth that contributes to the differences as well.
Okay.
You want to take the homeopathic or?
So let me just ask you a question. When you say, right, so what are you? So again, we're at the point, I told you for a long time there was almost no investment in Alzheimer's disease research. And recently that has ramped up. There still are relatively few risk reduction studies and even fewer lifestyle intervention studies. So to comment about supplementation as having some protective effect for cognitive decline, there's just no research there. So if you choose to take supplements, you're taking them based on a hope, a wish that they're going to actually have that they're going to have the result that you're wanting, but there's no foundation to that hope, really. And on the other hand, if you choose not to, perhaps your diet, if you look at your diet and it's far afield from the mind diet that we talked about, it perhaps is deficient in some key nutrients that taking certain supplements may help. So generally, taking a broad supplement or some broad supplements is not likely to be dangerous, but it may or may not be beneficial. So certainly if you have the resources to purchase them and you have the stomach to swallow pills, then probably it's fine. There are people who start targeting particular nutrients because they think that nutrient is going to be helpful. And then it can be problematic because nutrients often compete for being absorbed. So if you're without really the guidance of a health practitioner who's not necessarily just interested in selling nutrients, but is looking at the whole body, if they know and they think it's safe, it's probably fine. But if you just are self-medicating, it is the point. If you're taking high doses of whether it's vitamin C or vitamin E, there is a point that you're using it as a drug, intending to have a drug benefit, and that could be a dangerous position to put yourself in.
For the stem cells, I think there's a lot of research. There's a lot of activity. There's people trying all kinds of things. Personally, I'm more hopeful for Parkinson's because in Parkinson's disease, you're just losing a very small number of brain cells. They're important, but they're a very small number that maybe can be replaced. For Alzheimer's, I'm a little more hesitant to get enthusiastic because you're losing memory cells. How are you going to replace memory? So I don't think you can implant a memory back. It's a little more problematic to me to imagine how it's going to work. Having said that, there are a lot of people who just be super mad that I said that and said, I'm working on stem cells for Alzheimer's and I know it's going to work. So I think that maybe we just need to figure out how it's going to work. I think it's going to be something to watch for in the next 5 years. There's going to be a lot more people engaging in that area.
My question is referring to the beginning of your conversation, because my mother's a Ph.D. In my family, the conversation is she's showing these cognitive signs. And I came here, and thank you for this information, because I wanted to make sure I understood what our conversation should be about. But how do you approach the person who the conversation is about? Because the interesting thing is, we've done the test, they show a sign of change, but it's not significant enough to say that it's full-fledged dementia. So I came here to find out more information than what I Googled, and thank you for sharing a lot of this information. It's really great. But my concern is, how do I get the individual that is showing the signs to be open enough to really talk to her doctors about it and get the proper tests so that we can work on future changes or support?
Yeah, so it sounds like there's been some testing which has confirmed cognitive changes, which I'm assuming then that your mother knows or is aware that those changes have happened. If they're early, then it may just be a choice of hers that she doesn't want to talk about it or is not comfortable talking about it. And so the Alzheimer's Association offers something called care consultation, and that may be a step to have either the family come in and visit with our social worker, or maybe bring mom in along with members of the family and have a conversation, and for everyone to understand what the reasons would be to have an open conversation early, so that you can start doing things like developing a plan, making sure that you understand what her wishes are, and she understands the level of commitment and interest that the members of the family have. So there can be something productive from that conversation. Some people they just don't want to talk about their health conditions, and at the end of the day, we can't force someone else to decide to have a conversation about an issue that they would prefer to avoid. But if there's a need for more testing, I will just tell you, I did this with my mother, perhaps not intentionally, but I made an appointment for her with one of the centers of excellence in the medical center, and thought I would have a conversation with her before the date of the appointment. Unfortunately, there kept being reasons that we didn't. And she said, "You're lucky that I'm understanding." And I, "Really, why is that?" And she said, "Well, I just got a call from Baylor College of Medicine confirming my appointment with the Alzheimer's Disease and Memory Disorder Center for next Thursday." And she said, when I said, "Gosh, I don't remember making that appointment," she said, "You're just lucky I have a sense of humor." So, I mean, you know, that, it kind of forced a whole conversation, and we did go, and she did have the testing, which did demonstrate what the cognitive issues were. So ultimately, it was helpful. It wasn't exactly that I was avoiding having the conversation, but sometimes you just have to say, you know, if it were heart disease, you would go in and have the assessment, and just so that you understood what the baseline is, and so that may be the way to have the conversation with mom.
But the family can still go and try to develop a plan if the person is not open to it.
Yes, because part of it may be the plan of how you're going to try and move your family member along to have more of a conversation and be part of the planning that the family's going to start doing.
Mr. Elbein, Dr. Ray, thank you so much for your personal stories and insights. Appreciate it. Linda?
Yes, thank you very much. We want to thank the Health Museum again today. If you have questions, the Alzheimer's Association has brought some valuable resources. We have handouts in the back, but they've also brought Dr. Julie Kutak. Are you in the room still? And Anne-Marie McDonald. So if you have more questions, stick around. They're going to be out in the foyer. You can ask them questions. We want to thank the Health Museum. We want to thank our friends and the team at Alzheimer's Association. Gina, thank you for taking time for your day. If you enjoyed today's program, next Friday, February 8th, we will be at Tony's with our membership luncheon. There is a fee to go to that one. But we will have Dr. Dale Hamilton and Dr. Anisha Groupday with the Houston Methodist Research Institute, and they will be talking about the unfailing failing heart and some research that's being done on heart failure. So another informative session. So see us out in the front. We have more information. Again, thank you for being a part of our day. We appreciate you. Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. That's great.